Erev Tov again. Parashat Tazria. And yet again, we'll encounter some overlapping themes, and I'll try to refresh our memory from what we learned with Rav Shai Held, or from Rav Shai Held, on this very same topic in Vayikra last year. We'll see really an overall different kind of approach, although tackling some of the same dimensions and questions around what this essay, what Nechama calls the maternity offering. So let me share my screen. Here we go. The maternity offering, starting from the very beginning of the parasha. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל לאמור, אישה כי תזריע וילדה זכר וטמאה 7 ימים, etc. The Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, again, the very first verse of our parasha, speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a woman conceives seed and gives birth to a man-child, she shall be unclean 7 days. Then it goes on to talk about the additional 33 days of what the Torah calls Demei Tahorah. And then at the end of that total 40-day period, when the days of her purification are over for a son or daughter, 40 for a son, 80 for a daughter. Nechama doesn't go into that section. Rav Shai dealt with that in his essay as well. She shall bring a lamb of the first year for a burnt offering. That's an olah. A young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. A chatat, to the door of the tent of meeting, to the priest. So Nechama starts with an assertion. The laws of purity and impurity elude our grasp. The impurity of the mother recorded in the beginning of the parasha is particularly perplexing. Surely, procreation is a divine blessing as well as a command, addressed to Adam, progenitor of mankind, and twice repeated to Noach. Why should a mother be declared unclean for fulfilling a divinely ordained mission, the very first commandment in the Torah? Our commentators especially query the need for a sin offering. So 2 questions are being asked here. Why is there tum'at leida? Why is there a status of impurity, ritual impurity associated with childbirth? And second, at the culmination or conclusion of that period of impurity, offerings are offered, amongst them a chatat, a sin offering. Why should that be required? And we're going to see much more of a discussion of the sin offering than the question of the impurity, but there's some overlap in the answers. Thus, Abravanel, emphasizing the question, why did the Torah enjoin a mother to bring a sin and burnt offering? Surely a burnt offering is out of context. Okay, so just none of the usual reasons for a burnt offering seem to apply here. Neither is she due for a sin offering, since there is no transgression involved in childbirth. And all the more so, a chatat seems inappropriate because she hasn't done anything wrong. Bravanel suggests, and it's interesting that Nechama doesn't even cite Rashi. The classic answer seems to come from Rashi about she shouts things in childbirth that she later regrets. Nechama doesn't even cite it, goes straight to a different answer. First dealing with the burnt offering. Bravanel suggests the following explanation for the burnt offering. The reason seems to be that a woman after childbirth would bring a burnt offering on entering the sanctuary, once her period of purification had terminated, in order to cleave to her Maker, who had performed wondrous things for her, in delivering her from the pain and danger of childbirth. So here the idea is somehow it's the first korban mentioned by the Torah, as we discovered in the beginning of Vayikra, and it's sort of somehow paradigmatic of drawing close, and because there's this lengthier period of separation from the sanctuary, so the return warrants a sacrifice, and that sacrifice is about reconnecting, essentially. So that's the Abravanel on the burnt offering. Again, less problematic. We just need to find a purpose for it. The sin offering will be more challenging. According to Hoffman, that's Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, the sacrifice of a dove was brought by those kept away from the sanctuary. Okay, so we're noting here that the The sin offering was a young pigeon or a turtle dove. Okay, why that particular animal? So according to Hoffman, the sacrifice of a dove was brought by those kept away from the sanctuary. The dove denoted homesickness, as in Isaiah 68, where the prophet describes the Gentiles streaming to Jerusalem in the Messianic era. Who are these that fly up like a cloud and like doves to their nests? So there's something, the return of or arrival of other nations in the Messianic era has sort of the sense of a long-awaited homecoming, right? The Gentiles who had wandered restlessly would now acknowledge Jerusalem and Zion and what these symbolize as their spiritual home. Again, remembering that in general in Isaiah, this was not a conversion to Judaism. It was just a move, I guess, back from something that was viewed as pagan to something that was monotheistic. So a return to a one God. Similarly, those unable to enter the sanctuary, for example, a woman after confinement, offered a dove to mark their re-entry into the temple as a dove returns to its nest. So here again, building on the Abravanel's theme, but not just on the notion of the function of the Olah, but on specifically the fact that it's one of the options is a Ben Yonah, a turtle dove, that particular choice of animal for the Olah symbolizes again this notion of after a period of separation, there is a returning home. Meaning to focus on, I think, to emphasize, it's less about anything that was wrong about childbirth, God forbid, but about the fact that a consequence of childbirth, and of course this then returns us to the original question, what's with the impurity? But a consequence of the childbirth was separation from the sanctuary, and therefore then upon returning to the sanctuary, an appropriate offering about homecoming is in order. Again, there's no real discussion here about the purpose for the tum'ah. Rav Shai held focused when we studied it last year on the idea of kind of childbirth being both the greatest affirmation of life and also something around which the specter of death hangs almost more than anything else. Both infant mortality, the loss of blood at the time of childbirth, and so it sort of has these paradoxically combined elements of the affirmation of new life and the fulfillment of the commandment to be fruitful and multiply on the one hand, and the kind of looming fear, potential risk of death at the other, and that the tum'ah, the ritual impurity, is reflective of that sort of hanging, looming shadow of death. And that then generates or triggers the separation from the sanctuary, and now is the return to the sanctuary. The psalmist similarly notes, yea, the sparrow has found a house. This is Tehillim 84, 4 and 5, which, by the way, I think in reading it gives more new meaning and context to me for the Ashrei, which is really Psalm 145, but has the introductory line here from Psalm 84 of Ashrei Oshrei Betecha. So, yea, the sparrow has found a house, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young. Even thine altars, O Lord of hosts, my God, my King and my God. Happy are those who dwell in your house. They will continue to praise you, Selah. This, I don't know whether Reb David Tzvi Hoffman mentions this, or this is Nechama's own, adducing an additional text about birds and homecoming. But it's certainly a very apt source to talk about, birds coming home, and then sort of by extension somehow the place of the altar as a place of home and return, which then culminates for us in how fortunate are those who dwell in your house. So when we say that line of Ashrei, really is sort of invoking a sense of not just dwelling in God's house, but really finding a home and returning to a home in God's house, which I think is a beautiful kind of background context to that line. But Hoffman's explanation does not explain the need for a sin offering. Okay, that remains unaddressed by Abravanel and Reb David Tzvi Hoffman. Let us consult the Midrash on this question. It opens with the wonders of the evolving embryo and the miracle of birth. Following are some excerpts. And as Nechama is wont to do sometimes, she's going to give us some lengthy midrashic sections. I want to note, by the way, that the kind of praises of childbirth that are here, some of them or similar ones are also cited in Rabbanit Leah Sarna's fascinating essay, which I believe won the Ateret Tzvi, Hadar Prize for most novel Torah composition or essay. Really worth reading. It contrasts the sort of midrashic view of childbirth as this miraculous thing to the biblical narratives in which childbirth is so often experienced with difficulty, and sort of creates this relationship between the aspirational and the real, and sort of talks about how do we map that onto our everyday lives and teach people about the beauty and miracle of childbirth and also prepare them for the hardships and challenges associated with conception and parenthood. It's really a wonderful, important essay that I recommend. If I remember, maybe I'll try to send it in the email for next week. Okay, so following are some excerpts of the Midrash on the question of how do we understand and relate to childbirth, to pregnancy and childbirth. Rabbi Levi said, generally, if a man privately deposits a purse of silver with his neighbor, and he, the neighbor, returns him a liter of gold in public, will he not be grateful to him? Right? If you give a small amount of something privately to someone, and then they hand you back something much bigger and better in public, you would be thrilled. So it is with the Blessed Holy One. Mankind privately deposits with God a drop of fluid, whereupon the Creator provides them with complete and perfect living beings in public. Is this not praiseworthy? Thus I will fetch my knowledge from afar and will ascribe righteousness to my Maker. Now, the woman is sort of left out of this midrash. We should acknowledge that. She's doing the hard work in between the deposit and the return or delivery, so to speak. It's interesting that the midrash really focuses on God's contribution here. We should not ignore in any way, shape, or form the woman's contribution. But the emphasis here, as we can see, is kind of the miracle of something tiny and unimpressive turning into this being returned as this miraculous, fully formed being. Rabbi Levi said further, generally, when a man is imprisoned and no one pays any attention to him, and a person comes and releases him from there, will he not be grateful? So it is with the embryo that dwells in its mother's womb, and God releases it from there. Is not this praiseworthy? Okay, so we have the loving kindness which is done to the embryo. Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana said, generally, if a man holds a purse upside down, will not the money scatter? Yet the embryo dwells in its mother's womb, and God watches over it that it should not fall and die. Is this not praiseworthy? There's so many dimensions of the miracle of conception, gestation, and delivery. Thus, you have given me life and favor. Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana said further, generally, an animal walks horizontally, with the embryo in its womb held like a sack, whereas a woman walks upright with a child in her womb, and God preserves it that it should not fall and die. Thus you have given me life and favor. In Kuntras Aharon in Midrash Yilamdenu, we read, if a woman conceives, this evokes the verse, a man that is born of woman. One notices a beautiful column, like a pillar, and says, how beautiful is this column and how magnificent? Then his friend answers him, the column then excites your wonder? If you had seen the quarry from whence it was hewn, how you would have wondered. That would be really amazing. Imagine. Similarly, when a man sees a large beam, it excites his wonder. Then his friend exclaims, if you had seen the tree from whence it was taken, how you would have wondered. So that's on the one hand. Now, on seeing a handsome person with his locks hanging down and praising him, his friend declares, this one you praise? If you had seen from what impurity and dross he came, you would not have been able to look at him. Thus, a stone and a tree are superior to man, because what we have in front of us is only a small piece of something even more grand and grandiose, whereas a person, its origins and source are much more, unsavory than it. Indeed, Akavia ben Mahalalel stated, Regard three things and you will not come to iniquity. Know from whence you came and whither you go, and before whom you are destined to give account and judgment of yourself. From whence do you come? From a fetid drop. This was sort of the rabbi's distaste for semen. These midrashim exemplify two different approaches to our subject, as we could see. Rabbi Levi dwells on the miracle of procreation and the greatness of the Creator. The latter midrash highlights the insignificance of man before the awe-inspiring majesty of his Maker. The first approach is reflected in the following quotation from Psalm 8. Hashem Adonenu ma'adir shimcha bechol haaretz mipi olalim v'yonkim yisadet ha'oz. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth. Out of the mouths of babes and sucklings have you ordained strength. So we have, just again, it's an interesting, I don't know, she doesn't need to do this, but it seems like we've seen this already a second time, maybe a third time in this essay, turning to Tehillim to sort of support a midrashic approach in a sense. So here it's these Tehillim kind of noting the remarkable feature of humans in our being created. The laws concerning a woman after confinement, in our parashah, again, the confinement of being limited from coming to the temple in the weeks after childbirth, appear to accord with the latter approach. When Isaiah witnessed the majestic vision of the Almighty sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, God's train filled the temple, Seraphim stood above God. And when he heard the voice proclaiming, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzavakot Melocho La'aretz Kvodo, Holy, Holy, Holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of God's glory. The prophet, that's Isaiah, reacted as follows. Then said I, woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Right? So the reaction of Yeshayahu to God was not, this extraordinary maker who made me, and I, the human, must also be a wondrous being, but somehow a sense of inadequacy, and utter tininess in magnitude and unworthiness. Now she comes around to her explanation, again, differently than I think we've seen in a lot of Nechama. This really seems to be her own novel contribution. Not that the way she puts things together is not reflective of a lot of choice and insight, but usually she doesn't quite answer a question herself. She may just survey and reflect on the commentaries, but here we haven't seen anyone answer that question, which she asked about. Rav David Tzvi Hoffman's explanation does not explain the need for a sin offering. How do we understand it? So she says, let's consult the Midrash, but these Midrashim don't answer the question. She uses the Midrashim to say there's two approaches to, how we understand childbirth. One is the sort of miraculous wonder, and the other is a reminder of our, insignificance, still also miraculous, but our tininess and the fact that we are even created, we are not worthy. She then quotes psukim that sort of reflect both versions, and then says, perhaps this explains the impurity and the sin offering in the context of the woman after childbirth. The new life within her made her deeply conscious of the greatness of the Creator, as also of her insignificance as dust, ashes, and impurity. Hence the need for a sin offering. So she sort of brings it all together to suggest somehow childbirth, in its remarkable miraculousness and the way it makes us think about God's majesty and greatness, then helps us feel our insignificance. And again, we still have to make a leap, which is not quite clear, but somehow that manifests in a state of reducedness, which is, what the impurity symbolizes, and what the sin offering somehow relates to. Again, she's evading saying for sure that the delivering mother did anything wrong, but that somehow, in thinking of our smallness relative to God in a moment of childbirth, we then sort of feel humbled and wear this state of unworthiness that's kind of manifest by the tum'ah state, the impure state, and by the sort of act of bringing something that reflects reacting to wrongdoing, even though no actual wrongdoing happened, but we're sort of aware of our vulnerability to wrongdoing, imperfect state. Rav Shai, just by contrast, as he does sometimes, insist that there's been a great misunderstanding, right? You may remember the essay from last week's parashah a year ago on Shemini, which I found so impactful, on Aaron's silence, where he argued there's been a great misunderstanding. It wasn't silence at all; it was a cry, and suggested that, pointed to literature that argues that that's in fact what Vayidom really means, was actually cried out and not was still. So in our parasha, Rav Shai argues that we were greatly misunderstanding, and chatat in this instance doesn't actually mean a sin offering. It means a purgation offering. It means an offering of cleansing, and that is appropriate for a status of tum'ah. And the tum'ah itself, of course, is just reflective of the looming specter of death that surrounds childbirth. And so it's appropriate to sort of have a cleansing experience from that, which is what the chatat is. So for Rav Shai, the chatat is not a sin offering, and it's a cleansing offering related to the impurity, which is really about sensing the looming feeling of death that surrounds childbirth. For Nechama, childbirth is actually an experience of less thinking about the looming experience of death than the majesty of God as the creator and partner in childbirth. But in light of that, not focusing on death as much as focusing on insignificance, inadequacy, frail human condition, that is kind of represented by this distancing of tum'ah, and the kind of awareness of our likeliness to fall prey to sin. That is what the sin offering is responding to. No discussion here of the double period for a daughter as opposed to a son. Rav Shai, last year when we read it, commented that this might be reflective of the fact that because women are those who bring children into the world, so when a mother bears a daughter, she's sort of bringing in another, on the threshold of life and death person, and so it has that sort of second round of, or doubling of time period. Did Nechama have any children? I don't think so. Others shaking their head, affirming that indeed she did not. Questions, comments on this essay, on this topic? I won't press you for any at this late hour, so. David? Thanks.
It strikes me as notable that the Mefarshim that we're looking at to describe childbirth and the way that women feel during childbirth have all been written by men.
Yes.
And that our editor for those commentaries, not our live editor here, but Nechama, is someone who didn't bear children.
Yeah.
And it was not blessed with children. It's just wow. Seems that if we do this again next year,
should look at Dershuni.
Perhaps we could look at some female voices.
Yeah.
On this subject.
Yeah. Great. I will, all the more reason for me to encourage reading Rabbanit Leah Sarna's essay. For those who want to catch it even sooner, I'm going to pop it into the chat now.
I actually read her essay pretty carefully, and I have a lot to say about it. I wrote to her, spoke, because I think what's odd is that she actually uses Tazria to tell you that's the simple, uncomplicated description.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not really, your sources aren't really backing that idea. Also, I can't say why the chatat, but I can say it's pretty simple that blood, it makes you tme'ah. I mean, monthly blood, childbirth blood.
Yes.
So it's not a mystery why she's tme'ah.
Yeah.
You don't have to work too hard to explain it, and you don't have to associate it with death, which is basically my problem with her essay, is that she spends a lot of time talking about as if it's called catastrophe and miracle, as if they're equally common.
Yeah.
So the midwife me is not not hearing that anyway.
Right.
We should look at Dear Shuni. We should see what Tim Arbiala's people write about.
Okay. I'm making a note. Even if we don't do it for all of Vayikra, we'll do it for Tazria.
Right.
But it would be fun. It would be fun to take that on next year. So I'm making it for it.
Yeah, we're always this feisty at 7:05 at 7:01 at 9:28 at night. So.
Yes.
You're good. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. No, maybe we should schedule class for late every time. Anyways, thanks to all. Great to learn together. Again, appreciation for everyone's flexibility tonight. And love to mom and dad. Good night to all. Good rest of the week.